Yes, it was. It is 6:30. The City Council is convened for this meeting of December 21st, 2021. A couple of quick things to note at the very, very top of the meeting is it is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Might be a long night for the City Council as well. We do have a couple of items that are going to be detailed and probably garner some discussion. And as Councilor Gabriel was just mentioning, there was a bowl game, college football bowl game tonight that the folks played in. And what were you going to mention about that, Councilmember Gabriel? Go ahead, just real quick while I get the agenda up.
I was just going to offer my congratulations on behalf of the City Council for a very fine outing by the Wyoming football team. They represented the state of Wyoming very well.
And for those of you folks on the City Council watching the meetings or maybe watching them later, sorry that we do talk about the football and basketball teams, but hey, we do like them and we like to support them. There are other things that we mention from time to time here as well. I understand that the Shop with a Cop event was an excellent day and a big success just the other day. And I was happy to see the coverage about it in the newspaper. Another kind of thing that we'd like to mention. But let's go ahead now and get started. The meeting is convened, and let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm sorry that we diverged there for a few comments and the flag went down. So let's go ahead, however you'd like. Thank you very much. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Let's have public comment on non-agenda items. This is public comment on items that aren't featured on this evening's agenda. City Clerk, I'll check my attendee screen and check with you as well. Again, we're looking for public comment on items that aren't on the agenda. If there are any, now is the time.
Mr. Mayor, would you like a quick roll call for today's meeting?
Of course I would. I'm so sorry.
Cumbie.
Here.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schmickel.
Here.
Schuster.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 9 present and 0 absent, Your Honor.
All council members are here. Thank you, City Clerk, and for the reminder. And I haven't seen any hands raised for public comment on non-agenda items, so we'll close public comment on non-agenda items and move to item number 5, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the agenda be set as submitted.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Somerville. All those in favor, please say aye by raising your hand or vocalizing aye, or both.
Aye.
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 That motion carries. And that motion carries. Thank you very much. We have no proclamations this evening. We do have a public hearing, and I'd like the City Clerk to go ahead and give the notice for the public hearing.
Notice is hereby given that a public meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held at 6:30 p.m. on December 21st, 2021 in City Council Chambers, City Hall, 406 Ivinson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming. Due to COVID restrictions, meeting will only be held on Zoom to take public comments on the following: Original Ordinance number 2038, VAC 21-02, a vacation of approximately a 0.78 acre alleyway right-of-way within McHugh Addition Lot 1 through 11, Block 1, generally located west of McHugh Street, south of Lyon Street, and north of Baker Street. The application has been submitted by Nick Brisky on behalf of KOA. All applications, plans, and specifications relative to these matters are available for review at the City of Laramie Planning Office at 405 Grand Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming. Anyone wishing to be heard should be present via Zoom.
Thank you, City Clerk. We'll hold it open now for comments during the public hearing portion for this item. Just a moment. Seeing none, council members, City Clerk, I'm going to close the public comment on the public hearing and move on to the next public hearing. City Clerk, if you could please give the announcement.
Notice is hereby given that a public hearing of the Laramie City Council will be held Tuesday, December 21st, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom meeting for the following purpose. Original ordinance number 2039 adding Laramie Municipal Code section 8.80 related to Laramie Rental Housing Code. All information relative to this matter is available for review at the City of Laramie City Clerk's office at 406 Ivinson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming. Anyone wishing to be heard should be present or may be represented by his or her agent at the meeting.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. We'll go ahead and take public comment on the public hearing. City Clerk, procedural question for you. For the folks that signed up early, I believe they all wanted to speak to this item. Shall we go ahead and take the list that you had and use it for speaking order for the public hearing?
I think that would be appropriate, Your Honor.
Thank you. I think so too. Let's do that. And I have that here. What we'd like to do is provide the floor to Diana Seebeck. And let's please give Diana Seebeck the floor. You have the floor. Thank you for being here tonight.
You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This ordinance reminds me of a work situation that I was in for many years, where a few employees would be bending or breaking rules. And instead of the employer meeting with those employees one-on-one or addressing their behavior that needed correcting, they would have large meetings in which they would reprimand everyone as a group when it was only a few who were the offenders. And usually the offenders ignored the reprimands anyway. The large majority of private landlords strive to provide safe rentals that they themselves would live in. And I would ask you not to create an ordinance that requires more bureaucracy to regulate everyone. If an ordinance is needed, and I do agree and acknowledge that there are landlords that are unresponsive and do not provide safe environments, but I would ask that you would target those wrongdoers and not regulate everyone. I would also make the point that tenants have responsibilities too. They have a duty and a responsibility to keep premises clean and free of trash. They have the responsibility to notify landlords if something needs repair, and they have a responsibility to fix the things they break themselves. They also have the responsibility not to break laws on the premises, such as having disorderly parties or providing alcohol to minors. So if tenants are going to have a process to bring complaints that could result in fines, then I think that landlords should also have a process by which they can bring complaints which could result in fines. And that's all I have at this point. Do I understand that there's public comment at the end or after your discussion, or is that correct?
There will be an opportunity. Thank you for making time and taking that time out of your evening to be here with us and share your views. There'll be time to speak to this when the council considers the item. so there will be another opportunity to make public comment at that time.
Okay. Does the public have to sign up for that as well?
You can stay here on the call
No.
and simply raise your hand and indicate that you'd like to speak, and we'll call on you and have you brought into the meeting to speak again.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to make my points. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Next on the list, got Joshua Horak. I'm sorry if I didn't get the last name right. Let's allow Joshua into the meeting, and you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, yeah, thank you very much for this time, and I really appreciate it. And so a couple things I just wanted to mention in this is, one, there was some confusion for me because I was curious, why was there not any preliminary meetings for the council to discuss this? I couldn't find any material on that. It feels very rushed, especially in the holiday season when a lot of people are in and out. So that's the first one. The second thing is, I feel that the city of Laramie is asking the whole community of rental property owners, landlords, to pay the price for a few landlords that have truly taken advantage of their tenants. And undoubtedly, there is need for these landlords to step up their game and be held accountable for their inappropriate actions. At the same time, I do not feel like it is fair to ask the whole community of landlords and property owners who have walked with integrity, who value healthy and good living conditions, to pay a price for their actions. And I'm a father of 3 daughters, and when one of them does something they shouldn't be doing, I don't grab them all together and ask them all to pay that price and penalty and correct their wrongs. And I feel like that's what the city of Laramie is doing. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, I get nervous about these fees for many reasons. For the future of Laramie, there's going to be fees. That's going to raise prices on tenants, and that's going to even create more of a challenging issue for people who may have lower income to afford affordable housing. The fourth thing is, why not create an ordinance that lets an agreement between the renter and the landlord, where they can make sure unresolved complaints have consequences by bad landlords? Why not start there instead of penalizing the whole community? And then also, what are we doing as a city to reward good landlords? I've been a property owner and landlord for 20 years, and I can honestly tell you, every single one of my tenants, they love renting from me, and they go out of their way to actually find people to rent my places because they believe in me as a landlord. Why not reward that instead of having fees and more ordinances and restrictions that feel just not the city's place? So those are my things I wanted to bring up, and I appreciate you hearing my voice on that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On the list is Joe Arnold. Let's put Mr. Arnold in the room.
Yeah, I just hit the unmute button. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. You have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you for taking comments. And I would also echo what Josh Horak was saying. I'm a landlord with 7 units, so I'm pretty small potatoes. And my wife and I have been very conscientious in regards to the things outlined in the ordinance 2039, but we strongly disagree that we should have to register to be licensed with the city. I feel like it's a relationship, a contractual relationship, and sometimes turns into great friendships over the years, that the city really doesn't need to get involved with and add another layer of bureaucracy with extra officers checking in on things. I just think that's a bad way to go. And I'm also very curious as to why one of the biggest landlords in Laramie, the University of Wyoming, is exempt from this ordinance. I think that's a glaring double standard, and I can't see how it would not cause resentment when, you know, we have no recourse if somebody skips out on rent or trashes the place and leaves town. Sometimes they might even be Laramie University of Wyoming students. Whereas, you know, if you don't pay a parking fine, you can have your grades held up. So I think that double standard is something that should be addressed. I don't think it's fair, and I don't see that the ordinance is fair to landlords. It favors the tenant. And I would hate to see you guys try and balance that out, but I think better would be to reject this bill altogether. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for taking time to be here with us. Next on the list is Rainey Lins, and I hope I got the name right. I apologize if I didn't. And once I see you on my screen, you have the floor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor and City Council, this is Rainey Lins. My partner Amy Nigger and I own 7 units, and we submitted a letter to you today. I hope you received it in time, and so I just want to make sure that you received it, and if let you know that we're here if you have any questions about it. But I won't belabor the points in it.
Thank you very much, and you will have another opportunity to speak if you'd like at another point later in the meeting.
Fantastic.
You bet, and thanks for taking time to both write us and to be here tonight. City Clerk, let's go ahead and keep the public comment during this public hearing open for folks that didn't sign up ahead of time, and see if anybody would like to make comments now. I would say again, and I don't mean to be repetitive, but I would say again, there will be an opportunity to speak to this item at a later point in the meeting as well. Go ahead and recognize Brett Glass and let Mr. Glass in the room. And you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I am both a landlord and a tenant, and I'm very concerned about this ordinance because I believe it would do harm to me and to others who are in both roles. And I'm also worried that instead of listening to the public at this hearing, some of you, and I hope this isn't true, might have your minds already made up and pass the ordinance despite what you're here tonight. And that would be terrible because the damage it would do to the community would be awful, and the harm it would do to renters as well as rental property owners would be terrible. The first thing you should understand about this ordinance is that as written, it's not legal for several reasons. State law already has very good and fair provisions in it regarding disputes concerning the habitability of rental properties, and we encourage our tenants to be informed about their rights under that law. It also specifies very fair procedures for resolving problems that usually don't involve courts at all, and if they do go to court, they require only a minor fee which the tenant can recover if he or she wins in court. They don't require hiring a lawyer either because it's small claims court. Now, the Wyoming Supreme Court has ruled many times that due to what's known as the doctrine of preemption, a city isn't allowed to pass ordinances which overlap with, add to, modify, or conflict with state laws. And therefore, this ordinance, which imposes different timelines, different procedures, and different requirements, is contrary to state law, and it would be void if it were challenged in court. The ordinance also imposes a per-unit tax upon rental properties, and this too isn't legal because a city isn't allowed to impose a property tax by ordinance. The tax can't be called a fee imposed upon businesses rather than a tax because A, you don't get anything for it, and B, you don't have to set up a business to rent your property. It's always your right as an owner to do so. But let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that it could be construed as a business fee. It still wouldn't be legal because real estate businesses, including rental management companies, are regulated by state law. And therefore, again, that by the doctrine of preemption, the city isn't allowed to license them or require them to pay fees to operate. Also, whether it was a fee or a tax, the university, WCDA, and the Cheyenne Housing Authority wouldn't be required to pay it, and so it would harm local property owners while benefiting entities that don't even contribute to our tax base. Now, as for mandatory registration of rentals, if the city truly wants to deal with landlord-tenant issues only by complaint, as was claimed, registration isn't necessary. The fact that the ordinance does impose a registration requirement, despite this, is a sure sign that there is going to be mission creep and that the city really wants to barge in and inspect all rentals regardless of whether there's a complaint. But requirements to allow warrantless searches of rental properties or to register them have been ruled unconstitutional at least 8 separate times in state and federal courts across the country. Council should respect the law and not attempt to impose them. Finally, there are other vague and troublesome elements in this ordinance, such as unfairly blaming all mold problems on the landlord when they are most often caused by tenants, as well as a requirement for proof of insurance. What kind of insurance? It doesn't say. How much? Does the city intend to override the State Department of Insurance or our mortgage lender by imposing its own requirements on insurance? Will individual owners be able to afford extra insurance if they want to rent out their basement or accessory buildings? Vague laws are unconstitutional also, and city regulations with regard to insurance might limit the supply of housing and again conflict with state law. There's more, but I'm getting near the end of my 3 minutes. All I can say is that I'm trying to be a good landlord and a good citizen, and if it weren't immediately overruled, and there probably will be a lawsuit in district court to nullify it if it passes, this ordinance would not help, but rather would get in the way of my family's 30 years of efforts to provide quality, affordable housing. This ordinance would be bad for Laramie and bad for tenants and would decrease the available stock of rental housing. It'd be yet another step by council toward needless, non-productive, and harmful bureaucracy at a time when we need to make local government more efficient, not expand it. And so I urge you to simply vote this ordinance down altogether this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking time to be here tonight to share your views. I'd like to recognize Jeremiah Ryman, and again, I hope I'm getting the names right, and if I'm not, I do apologize. Mr. Ryman, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Jeremiah Ryman. My wife and I own a property at 1360 North 18th Street, and we've had that property as a rental unit since 2008. In that time, since we put it up for rental, we've replaced landscaping, siding, roofing, flooring, windows, and much more. We appreciate the issue that you're trying to address, and that there have been landowners that have caused and created issues. We respect reasonable regulation, but we wanted you to be aware of a couple of our concerns. Appreciate that you, through the amendments that have been posted, will be addressing one of the 3 issues that we initially had with the proposed ordinance. The other 2 issues for us, first is the owner's agent provision requiring residents within Albany County. As some of you know, my wife and I reside in Cheyenne, just 7 blocks from the state capitol. We've never been absentee landowners. We've always been responsive via phone and traveling to our property. In fact, between transfer of property, we actually take a week and make sure that it is habitable for our new tenants moving in. If the provision requiring residents in Albany County prohibits our location and requires us to hire an owner's agent, despite the fact that our home is less than 49 miles from our property, we're concerned that we're going to have to impose additional costs on our tenants. And it's just something that we see unavoidable. There's simply nobody that wants to be an owner's agent and have to be subject to the requirements that are here, but we're certainly happy to be that individual, and hope that you might consider revising the provision to allow a radius from the exterior boundary of the city of Laramie, perhaps 65 miles. Again, we're 49 miles from our property. The second provision that causes us some concern is requiring appliances to be in good working order. Now, we know we're required to provide certain appliances by state statute, and we have no issue with this provision relative to those appliances. The issue for us is that we do provide our tenants with a washer and dryer. We're not required by state statute to do that. We're concerned if this provision remains that we may be forced, or at least to consider, removing those appliances from our property simply because we don't want to have to maintain something that we're not required to have if the circumstances ever presented that we had to repair that and we didn't want to. So we would just ask that you revise that provision to have it only apply to those statutorily required appliances. Now, in our circumstance, we've actually repaired those over time, those washers and dryers, but I can't tell you that we would always do that. And I would hate for us to have to remove something that our tenant might otherwise like, but because of this provision, we would be forced to remove them. So with that, Mr. Mayor and council members, I appreciate, again, the conundrum that you're under. We would just ask that you address our two concerns as you consider this further. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riemann, and I do apologize for my earlier mispronunciation of your name, and thank you again for taking time to be here and sharing your views with us. We'll see if there's City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that I did receive a response from Stephen Pence for public comment as well on this item.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I didn't see him on the list that you had sent me prior to the meeting.
Yeah,
Clerk.
It came in after I emailed that, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, no, and members of the council and members of the public in attendance, I don't mean to put the city clerk on the spot by any means. I'm sorry that we didn't get that addressed earlier. Let's let Mr. Pence go ahead and provide public comment, and then we'll go back to the list of folks raising hands. Mr. Pence, thank you for waiting and your patience and for taking time to be here. You've got the floor. Mr. Pence, we're not able to hear you on our audio. Sometimes that can just be a matter of time. If you're on the phone, I believe pressing *6 will unmute you. And if you're on a different device, then going down to the bottom left corner of your screen and tapping unmute.
How about now?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, you may have known all that already. I apologize. But you have the floor, sir. Go right ahead, and thanks for being here.
Not a problem. Thank you for your patience. I have some questions regarding the ordinance. I don't know if this is the correct forum to ask questions. Shakes of heads.
Yeah, Mr. Pence, all I'd say about that is we probably won't be able to, we're not in a position to provide you an immediate answer, but there'll be an opportunity to perhaps address those questions when we get to the item later in the meeting, so we'll try to keep track of them now.
Okay, sounds good. And I don't want to beleaguer any points that you guys may address later. I manage, I'm the broker at Laramie Property Management Group. We manage about 500 rentals here in town. And I sent a note out to the owners that I work with to kind of keep them apprised of the situation and kind of what the comings and goings and as this advances through City Council. And I've had many a conversation with them over the last few days regarding their concerns. And so some of them may call in. I can't speak for all of them, but I'm going to try and encapsulate as many of the conversations as I can. The two main overarching concerns that I've seen come through. One is this concept of a rental registry. We see it as being somewhat incongruent with the goal of wanting to increase communication. It seems like there would be ample provision to process complaints if someone provides a rental lease agreement, and that you guys would have everything that they, or the city manager would have everything that they would need in order to process a complaint without having to have a list of every person, their name, address, and phone number, which I believe Albany County already has by all rights. But so that's a point of concern. A lot of the owners are kind of old school, and they like Wyoming being a non-disclosure state, and so it kind of raises the hairs on the back of their neck when they hear about needing to register with the city. The fact that there's not a limit on what can be charged for a fee is also a concern. The other concern that I've seen over and over is the concept of the egress that's going to be proposed. And I guess my question would be for you all, what really the intent is there on the larger multi-unit buildings, 3-4 stories tall. Are we looking at rope ladders for them to be able to climb out of the upper windows? Is the fact that there's 2 egress out of the building sufficient? It seems strange to me that you would only need 2 forms of egress out of a studio apartment, and also only 2 forms of egress out of a 6-bedroom house. And the fact that the requirements are the same for every rental, regardless of size, seems not very well thought out. And so those are our main questions, I guess, is kind of where, like, what the intent is there. If the intent is 2 forms of egress out of every bedroom, or if it's really just out of every unit. And then, but yeah, every owner also was a little taken aback by the fact that the university gets a free pass on all this. We don't feel like there's any less likelihood of someone dying in a fire of Whitehall as it would be in the Connor or the Wagner building. And so it seems incongruent that they would not be held to the same standards. So those are our main questions, and I look forward to maybe getting answers to those as we go forward.
Thank you very much for taking time to be here. Go back to the list. Linda Devine has raised her hand. Let's let Linda Devine into the room, and you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm here again on behalf of the tenants, and it's disappointing that we're not hearing their voice today. I will tell you, as someone that represents a lot of folks that rent, is quite often they're afraid to come out and speak out because they're afraid that there's going to be some kind of a reprisal against them. So please don't misinterpret the fact that they aren't here tonight, that they don't support this ordinance. I don't understand why there is so much opposition to this. I've seen things where folks are saying, well, don't punish the good landlords and different things like that. But I guess I don't stand. If you're doing the right thing for your tenants, then this really shouldn't affect you that much. You should be okay. I will tell you, as an attorney that represents the poor a lot, that I get lots of calls from people, and whether it's mold, whether they can't get their furnace fixed, whether the windows are broken, over and over again, these are the calls that I get from people. So, and I don't know how to get them to talk to y'all. I don't know whether just getting them some of their names or having them write some letters to you would help you. But I can tell you that this is a much needed ordinance. It's disappointing to me sometimes to hear folks, these landlords, being so opposed to it. If you're taking care of your rental properties, you don't have a whole lot to worry about. And I'm hearing people on Facebook talking about their houses getting trashed and things like that. Just like these bad landlords, you're going to have some bad renters. So I would ask you all and urge you tonight not to hear the loudest voices in the room tonight, to remember folks that were here last week. And I would urge you to continue this ordinance and pass it. And thank you for your time.
Thank Thank you, and thank you for taking time out of your evening to share your views with us. Go back to the list, City Clerk, on the public hearing. I'll note again there will be an opportunity to speak again on this item. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at this time. Council members, and we'll go to the next agenda item, announcements.
Good evening, Mayor. We have no staff announcements this evening.
Thank you, City Manager. I do see an item for a monthly staff recognition. Who will be providing the introduction for that? Assistant City Manager Feeser.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, it's a pleasure to be here this evening with you, especially since I get to do the Rockstar of the Month, which is, as you know, the city's policy for recognizing employees that have gone above and beyond. This month's Rockstar of the Month, or actually I should say November's Rockstar of the Month, was Terrence T.J. Johnson, who works for the Laramie Police Department. I'm not sure how many of you remember, but Terrence was nominated for his life-saving award that he received in July of 2021. And it was interesting to note as I read through the article and what few times I've been around TJ is that Christy Andrews said the same thing that I would say, is that TJ is awesome. He really is a model of the police officer, and we're very, very blessed to have him here on the City of Laramie. TJ started his career as a community service officer and then attended the police academy and was surprised at how much he enjoyed that type of work over the construction jobs he had held previously. Currently, TJ is also assisting with trainings and instructs officers on the use of less lethal armaments such as tasers, pepper spray, and beanbag shotguns to make sure that we're well trained. TJ, I gotta get my glasses on. Some of the things that acquired Principal TJ is his sensitivity to the fact that he represents not only himself but the entire police department, and he wears that on his sleeve. If you ever spent time around TJ, he really shows that. The way he interacts with our community and our people is a true testament to our entire department. TJ is a native Laramigo. He thinks some people would be surprised to know that he's a police officer now after some of his youth interactions, but we're excited to have him on board with us. TJ enjoys fishing and hunting. He says he's not complex, and what you see is what you get. Having a calm and unassuming demeanor are two qualities that are admirable and beneficial when serving the public, both of which TJ exudes, said Police Chief Dale Stalder. So if you join me in a round of applause for Terrence TJ Johnson as our November Rockstar of the Month. Thank you. I don't believe TJ's with us tonight either. I'm not sure how many of you attended his award for life-saving, but he didn't truly enjoy that recognition either, so I couldn't imagine we could get him here to participate in this recognition as we go through. So thank you.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager. Yeah, I don't believe the officer is big on self-promotion, which is okay. We appreciate hearing about him from the management team. As we said at the top of the hour, and I'm going to mention again real quick, the community response to those events like Shop with a Cop and things like that are really great, and it's great to get these kinds of staff recognition opportunities from the leadership team to tell us about some of these employees that we don't get to interact with on a regular basis. So thank you very much. Let's go to the next portion of the agenda, which is disclosures. Item number 7, disclosures. Are there any council members? Are there any council members that have any disclosures that they wish to make with regard to any items on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an item for the Vice Mayor. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I move that the consent agenda be approved and that each specific action on the consent agenda be approved as indicated.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Harrington, I believe. Motion and a second. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote on the consent agenda?
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
Thank you. That motion carries. The consent agenda has been approved. Thank you, City Clerk. Takes us to item number 10, the regular agenda. Now begin the items on the regular agenda, starting with item number 11, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve original ordinance number 2036, amending sections 15.10, 15.12, and 15.14 as recommended by the Planning Commission on second reading in accordance with findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Second.
The motion and a second from Councilmember O'Doherty. Councilmember Harrington, at this point, we're going to go to Mr. Cheney from the Community Development Office for background on the item. Mr. Cheney, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. The item before you is on second reading. This is the same ordinance that was presented at first reading. No changes were made between first and second reading. I want to just point a few items out just related to the staff report, the cover sheet, the information. One, if you see on the cover sheet, there was a request for a potential additional motion, as you'll see, that's on the cover sheet, and I'll allow that to come up through discussion with council. Secondly, following the very first meeting, and then at the second meeting, we were postponed, and we didn't get to this item, and so we're on second reading this evening. There were a couple of pretty specific council questions regarding the zoning and the distinction or the breakout of said zoning related to the changes that we're seeing. And as staff was preparing that material, we felt it was just easier to put into the cover sheet. And so if you look on pages, starting on page 3 of your cover sheet and then pages 4 and on to 5, we provided kind of answer to 2 questions. The first one was, what is really truly the breakout of our residential zoning within our community? And if you take a look, staff, what we did is we broke out the parcel or the zoning by both parcel number and acreage. And what's encouraging, at least from a planning standpoint, is actually we have a really good balance of residential zoning across our community. When you take a look at essentially kind of a third of R3 zoning, a third being R2 zoning, little less than a third being R1 zoning, and then you have some of your LR and RR zones that are also single family zones, kind of comprising and making up a little bit more of that single family zoning. And what's encouraging about that is many communities struggle with having simply just too much single family zoning. Many communities range in the 70 percentile of having 70% of their zone, all their land in their city being single family zoning. And that's tough. And so what's encouraging to see these numbers is that we're fairly well balanced out when it comes to the different zoning districts that we do have when it comes to residential opportunities within our community. In the little chart below, you'll see in the table just the exact percentages. You can see the total acreages and the actual number of parcels that we have related to those different zoning districts as well, if you want to really get into the numbers there. And then secondly, just there was some kind of discussion about, where we may see some of these changes and how these changes may affect things. And so one of the things we wanted to point out just in the staff report is many of these changes that you're seeing today with this ordinance are going to allow for essentially what we would call somewhat traditional development that we've already seen in Laramie's past. The city staff just provided just a series of a few blocks and ranges of lots within our community that are already extremely small lots, narrow lots, that really kind of are mimicking the changes that we're recommending in this ordinance here. Also, just pointing out that in existing neighborhoods, remember that some of these changes may create additional units. We do know that. That is part of the purpose of this, is to allow for that as an opportunity. But also, on the other hand, not all properties will be able to take advantage of this because simply the existing development just won't allow it. Maybe the house is situated in a location that doesn't allow for one of these accessory units maybe in the backyard, or maybe there's not enough room for parking to add another unit. And so those would be all things that we will be looking at as we see this, as this ordinance potentially moves forward. And so I wanted to point out that was a new addition to the cover sheet, and I think kind of answer some of the questions that were brought up during the first reading. Secondly, I just want to briefly touch on not necessarily the changes, but directing you to the public comments related to this item. The public comments and where these public comments are coming show really broad support of why we need to see these changes. Not only are we seeing majority of these comments being supportive comments, but from the general public, from agencies such as Interfaith, who deal and work with some of our citizens that are in lower socioeconomic classes that struggle with housing within our community, but also with organizations like Laramie Chamber Business Alliance, who see housing as a barrier to potential recruitment and economic development. But then also you're seeing some of our engineers and developers also supporting this change. And I think what I'm focusing on here is the wide scope of where these changes are coming from and why we're bringing them forward. If you remember, Council, the city went forward with an effort to look at our housing for our community. And through that process, through consultants that were hired by the city council, through multiple work sessions, we derived this direction to come up with the potential changes that you see today. And we do support these, and we think that these are a step in the right direction. And, finally, just to reiterate, remember, for Laramie, unfortunately, we have no silver bullet. You've heard many of the staff, you've heard people reiterate that. There's simply just not one solution to solving our housing problem within our community. And I think this is one aspect of that we do believe is going to help and make changes in a positive direction. And so really with that, I think I'll leave my discussion at that and would be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cheney. I'm going to go back to Councilor Harrington. Councilor Harrington, you still have the floor if you are ready to start with questions, or I'll go to the next person in line. Councilmember Somerville, I see you've got a hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Cheney, I wonder if you could just clarify for the public, in the packet when you talked about percentage of parcels zoned R2, R3, et cetera, can you speak to whether that is just in general all of those parcels that are zoned, or those are the undeveloped parcels within the city limits that might see development consistent with these changes?
Mayor and Council, this is all the parcels in total across the community. So this includes developed and undeveloped parcels.
Mr. Mayor, follow up?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Cheney, I wonder if you could just talk, and I know we've touched on this before, where you think within the city limits where we're likely to see the development within the R2, R2M, and R3 if this goes forward. Specifically, what areas of town have the most vacant parcels or lots that would be conducive to additional development?
Yeah, Mayor, Council. So I think I think the first thing that I would say is, I mean, throughout our community, we definitely have parcels that maybe remain vacant. So I think I would first say that there are definitely random locations throughout the community where parcel just simply hasn't been developed, whether it was an old subdivision or a more recent subdivision, that we would see potentially these changes allowing for some sort of development. But looking beyond that, where I would say we would have more opportunity beyond just the individual parcel or parcel that's kind of located just throughout neighborhoods. As we kind of start looking at our community, I would say first off in West Laramie, we have definitely some larger lots out in that, within West Laramie, that most of that area being R2, R2M, some R3 zoning. In that area, I would say that you have a lot of vacant parcels within West Laramie that would be allowed for development. This would allow for other, development that's different than our standards currently today if these were to be approved. A lot of West Laramie, though, would still require some of the improvements that you would see in all of our other neighborhoods: paved roads, streets, infrastructure such as utilities being extended. So I think you would see that area as potential growth. In our northern kind of portion of our community, I would say generically between 3rd Street and 9th Street, we have land that's zoned R3 that is vacant. In that area, the recent water projects that are being done by our Public Works division are going to provide for the ability for those areas to develop, because right now they mostly lack water service in that area. And so the work that's being done by that division and department will help in that aspect, and it's actually a large area of R3 growth. And kind of our most northeastern portion of our community, most of that is single family zoned, as well as kind of our eastern flank of our community. Those areas are not being affected by the changes that we see in the changes being recommended in this ordinance today. South in the Turner Tract area, we definitely have some land that's zoned R3 as well as zoned, it's zone B1 as well as multifamily residential in some of that area. In those areas, the B1 zoning district can allow for apartments and things. It's not directly affected by this, but if zone changes were to occur, there's a significant amount of vacant land in that area that we would see potentially changes there. And then in really I would say kind of if you think in the kind of Corthell Hill area, most of that area is zoned single family. We probably wouldn't see changes there. But just west of that, kind of in the South 17th Street range, all the way over to 3rd Street, you have a series of R3, R2 land that could be developed as multifamily, and that these changes would affect. So I'm kind of tried to make that brief. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. It did. Thank you.
Other questions, discussion about this topic? Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, Mayor, I am encouraged by the suggestion and the new potential recommendation by city staff, and I'm wondering if we are ready to put that motion on the floor, and how do you want to handle that procedurally? Do we do this and then the second one, or how do you want to handle comments, and how are we going to separate that out from the public?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor. I appreciate the inquiry there. And City Clerk, what I believe is in order is voting on the first motion, and then introduction of the second possible motion. So to the Vice Mayor's question, thank you. All right, good. It's nice to be right occasionally. As to the Vice Mayor, to your question, I think we should just go ahead and take comment on the item on the floor now, and then go back to the council for any further questions or comment, and then we'll go to the vote, and then whatever the pleasure of the council is for the introduction of the second measure. But I'm interested in your thoughts on that, Vice Mayor, if you have a different suggestion.
Well, my vote on the first is dependent on the second. Yeah.
Procedurally, I think we have to dispose of the first motion before we go to the second. So you'll have to decide, I believe, on your own individual basis how you want to move forward. But the point is noted, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Thank you.
Council members, are there any further questions on any of this material before we go to public comment, and then we'll come back? Does that sound good to everyone? Right. Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and go to public comment on this item. I see we've got a couple of hands up, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Brett Glass. We'll go ahead and let Mr. Glass into the meeting, and Mr. Glass, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying not to be too vociferous this evening, but these just happen to be items that are of concern to us. This proposal really doesn't have broad support, contrary to what staff says. If you take a look at the comments in your docket, you'll see that it's supported mostly by the developers lobby. They want to maximize their profits, and they want to cram highly urbanized, ultra-dense housing into any available piece of property that they can build on. This is sort of an end run around Council's decision only a couple of months ago not to rezone lots on the west side to allow dense development. This would allow that development, but it would do more. It would blight most of the residential neighborhoods in Laramie with incongruous development. Now, one of the problems I'm seeing during this discussion is that there seems to be some conflation of housing density and housing affordability. And until recently, we had an assistant city planner who seemed bent on increasing the density of housing in Laramie, even in areas where affordability was not a concern. And this is inconsistent with our culture, our history, and our residents' desires. I fear that one factor that has led to the drafting of a bad ordinance is, again, this trend toward, well, maybe if we densify housing, it'll become cheaper. And it's just not true. The truth is that land in Laramie, even in the most expensive neighborhoods of our cities, is not expensive compared to land in other places. If you look at the county assessor's records, the value of most building in Laramie far exceeds the value of the lots on which they're built. Packing people in like sardines doesn't do anything to make housing more affordable, but it does destroy quality of life. And this is not NIMBYism, it's just a fact that Council has recently recognized. So instead of changing the zoning classification of the lots in question, what this does again is goes around it and tries to densify the existing zones, and I don't think that that's a good idea either. So please respect not only the desires and concerns of the residents of the west side, but also those of all residents of the R2 and R3 zones. Those zones contain the majority of the single-family homes and duplexes in our city. If you want to make housing affordable, don't do it by destroying quality of life. Instead, try to preserve it. You can do that by rejecting this ordinance and bringing a new one specifically related to things like accessory buildings on existing residential lots, and by including other zones such as LR and B1 in that ordinance as well, since there are already many small rental cottages in those zones too. Anyway, that's really all I have to say. I really think this needs to be considered and not passed as is. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and for taking time to make them. Next up, I'd like to recognize Karen Bard. And let's give Ms. Bard the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council people. I am the chair of the Albany County Historic Preservation Board. We do have a little bit of a concern with regards to this and its impact on the west side. It is my understanding at this point in time that you have it on your work schedule in January to start a discussion about putting a historic layer in place for the west side. We, as the Albany County Historic Preservation Board, are planning to move forward with a nomination for that for the National Historic District. I don't know whether or not, how the process goes as to which is better, but I would request that this is amended and that the west side is exempt from this until you actually do the work to determine whether or not you're going to put a historic layer across the west side. Work and reviewed your document as far as the housing audit, and on page 11 your suggestion that you could rent out some of these carriage houses at $840 per month, and they're only 600 square feet. If you do a comparison to the availability of apartments and rentals in Laramie now, that is not affordable housing on a square foot basis. I'm also concerned that this isn't really going to meet your intended goals of affordability, and that it will also be a general decrease in quality of life here in Laramie. So I would just recommend or make the request from our board to the council that you seriously consider the impact, because I would be very concerned about how many high density projects will go into the west side during the approximate 12 to 18 months for you to work through putting a historic layer over the west side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience and for sharing your views with us. Next, we have Wendy Chapman. Council members, let's let Ms. Chapman into the room, and you have the floor. Thank you for taking time to be here.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Chapman, and I do live on the west side. I've been here for 23 years and love the neighborhood. I am concerned about a few areas. Just to, one of the things is the Brownfield Program that ended up with a plan. So far, I think it's only a plan that could put a lot of dense housing near the sculpture, that new head, the big head, in between that and the Spiegelberg brick building that used to be part of the railroad. So it's basically between kind of Cedar and the river. You guys probably know better than I do exactly where it is, but it would involve some dense housing, and I worry that this decision could impact that. That would change our neighborhood irreparably. There's also property between the new duplexes that are on Cedar and, is it Flint? Between those and the railroad, there's some empty space that I also worry might end up with densely packed housing. I don't know, and I'm curious how many more lots in our neighborhood might be have dense housing built on them because of this this proposal. So that's I'm concerned. I am concerned about dense housing and big buildings being scattered about in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time to share your view and your perspective. Going back now to see if there is additional comment on this item before we go back to the council for any further questions or discussion. City Clerk, I saw a hand up just a few moments ago before comment provided by the Chapman, but I think the hand has gone down. I don't know if there was a mistake or an accident, so I just want to give it just a minute.
Sorry, Mayor.
It's always I believe it was from our call-in listener, which is why I'm giving it just an extra moment, just in case there was a mistake. And it's certainly always okay to change your mind if you don't want to make a comment.
It may have been a mistake, Mayor. That is our Clarice Hoff, our code administrative services.
Okay, that's fine. I like to check because I don't want to miss anybody. Council, I'm going to close the public comment period on that motion and go back to you for comments and questions. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a point of information, it is my understanding that we do not have a meeting scheduled in January to discuss a National Historic Overlay. Looking at our agenda, it is not on our list of meetings. I think the nearest thing to that is a work session requested for late spring on overlay options. I just wanted to make that clear for members of the public who may have spoken. And if I am incorrect, I would love to be corrected, as that would obviously affect Ward 1.
We'll give the city clerk a moment to verify that information, and I would note that there will be an opportunity for the council at item number 15 on the agenda tonight to discuss that further. But we'll see. Yes, city clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to confirm what Councilor Harrington has said, I am unaware of any future work sessions at this time.
Thank you, City Clerk. Councilmember Harrington, at this time, I'd suggest that we bring this back up for discussion when we reach item number 15 on the agenda this evening.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just for clarity's sake, that was not my intention. My intention was just to clarify for members of the public who may have heard that and wondered what was going on. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
You bet, Councilmember, and with you completely. I simply want to emphasize that we can address that at item number 15. Council members, other discussion or questions on this topic? Councilmember O'Doherty.
I want to say, as somebody who was co-owner of an engineering firm, that the cost of the lot development, a lot of it depends on the frontage. So to say making them more dense is going to not make things more affordable. Just when you do the math, it's the connections to the water and the sewer and all that stuff that have a big effect on lots and the expense of a lot. And then the other thing is we have small lots. We have small lots in Laramie, and we have small lots in the west side. We have very small lots on near 3rd Street. So I see this as kind of going back to the old way, the more historic way, if you will. And I have one more question. I know people my age who were actively trying to downsize their lot size so they have less yard work to do. And so I see that as another advantage. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
All right. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the actual ordinance before us. I think it's probably no surprise that I'm to council that I'm in support of this ordinance as written currently. The thing that I think the conversations I've had with many of you and many members of the public have really centered around preventing sort of like the scrape of property and build up something else. This sort of like fast wave of you could scrape it and build something new. And I just wanted to share that in other conversations I've been illuminated to the fact that that's doable now. And we are not seeing it. That's just not something that's happening in Laramie. And I think largely you can point at the cost of housing. As a member of the public said, the the building itself is incredibly expensive, regardless of the condition. And I think with that in mind, it becomes even easier for me to support this ordinance. So I would encourage you all to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other comments from the council? Since that we're probably coming to a vote on this, and there is another motion. Checking one more time, council members, before the roll call vote. City Clerk, the roll call vote on this item.
Cumby,
No.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
No.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 7 yeses and 2 nos, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That motion carries. Councilmember Harrington, back to you on this item for second motion. It's, I believe, your prerogative to make.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure what the intention of the motion is, so I'm going to leave that one and let another council member make the motion if they would like to.
All right. I believe Mr. Teeny has some information to give us about this, but it does need to be brought onto the floor. Council members, do I have a volunteer for the motion? Councilmember Schmeckel, I think you were first. Sorry, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve a recommendation by council to direct staff to begin housing-related amendments for the R1, LR, and RR zoning districts.
Second.
Second.
A motion and a second from Vice Mayor Pierce. Mr. Teeny, are you prepared to provide some background for this motion?
Mayor, Council, I can do that. I think with this motion, what I think we would stress is that when we look at the proposals and the changes that we've made over the last, I'm just going to say year, related to specifically housing related amendments, largely they've been focused on non-single family zoning districts. And I think it's important to know a little bit about the history of why that's been the case. Through the work of the Thrive Plan as well as the community builders work, we really had to narrow our focus. And during those initial work sessions when community builders was first brought on and we were beginning to work on the Thrive Plan, our multifamily zoning districts were looked at, as well as our downtown zoning district, as the primary areas in which we could potentially make changes and see the most potential change that would be beneficial to our housing market. By no means do I want to say, though, that the single family zoning districts, which we have 3 different zoning districts within the city of Laramie that accommodate single family zoning, those do play a role also in our housing stock and the way in which our housing is within our community. As I alluded to in my earlier conversation, in most communities, the single family zoning districts are the dominant zoning within a community. And when that's the case in your community, communities often struggle because in a single family zoning district, pretty much there's only one thing that's allowed there: single family homes, 1 unit. And that's very limiting. In Laramie, we don't deal with that as much because we do have a more even distribution of our zoning districts, but to not say that it doesn't play a role wouldn't be genuine either. And I think that really the intention of that motion being, I think, put on the cover sheet to allow for this discussion to happen is that, there are definitely changes that could be made in those zoning districts as well that could aid towards our housing. It's just we haven't got there yet. We just haven't. It's not been something we've been directed to work on. It was not in our Thrive Plan, and it's not been in our community builders work. But it's also another aspect of our housing that I think that, from a staff position, there are things that we definitely could take a look at, bring forward, and start making changes in those districts as well. Kind of in the end, taking a pretty holistic approach to all the zoning districts the city of Laramie has that accommodates residential development in it. And so I think I'll just leave it at that. I think it's more of a timing thing as to why you haven't seen that yet. But this maybe gives us some direction to start down that road.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. I appreciate the background on that. And I would like to note for council and others that the secondary motion was included this evening on this agenda item at request of council. And I think it's fair to say most notably the vice mayor and myself, because there is a great deal of concern around this timing issue that Mr. Cheney just referenced. And council, also a need for us to try to do two difficult things at once. One of which is to maintain some coherence as a council, where we've asked our planning and development staff to bring us changes and to do them one piece at a time. But in doing so, we're asking them to do that with a housing code package for the council that really deals with an issue that's kind of holistic in nature. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of things going on. So it's difficult to know which piece to go with first. So I appreciate that little preamble there. And Vice Mayor, I did see that you were waiting, and I hope you're okay with those statements that I just made, but I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you, Derek, for adding this to this discussion. I think the key word is holistic, and I'm really super excited that we have the opportunity to potentially include R1, RR, and LR. My question for you, Derek, is basically, is 2 weeks going to be enough time? I mean, we will be revisiting this item, the first meeting in January, and we've had discussions where maybe we might need a little more time. So are you, because it says, I mean, the motion is to bring, housing related amendments. And so I'm just wondering, can we get that holistic work done, or do we need to push this to say like the end of January as a next motion for postponement to the end of January?
Mr. Cheney, that's to you.
Mayor, council, I think my intention with the way in which I wrote the motion is I think that the first thing that we need to do is have a work session on this specific topic of these single family zoning districts. They're definitely different and distinct than what we're dealing with here. There's a few parallels, but the large differences is that the single family zoning districts are still single family zoning districts. And so we're not going to be discussing necessarily increases in maybe number of units or things like that, unless we have discussions about, for instance, like ADUs or something like that. But my intent would be to proceed forward with the current ordinance that we have. Look at scheduling a work session to gain some feedback from council related to the R1, LR, and RR zoning districts, and then bring amendments through the process following that. Once we get a better idea of kind of what maybe council is comfortable with and potential ways, because there's a lot of ways in which communities are looking at their single family zoning districts. And it's definitely something, it's a topic we just haven't had discussion about. And so I would be a little bit, I think, in the dark in terms of just bringing things forward. I don't think that would be a wise use of our time.
Vice Mayor, to follow up there before I move on.
Mayor, can I have a follow-up?
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry, I asked, but perhaps you couldn't hear me. Go ahead, Vice Mayor, yes.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure I'm getting it. And I apologize for potentially not getting it. But Mr. Cheney, so what you're saying is this motion is, let me see if I can paraphrase what you said. So basically it's just to find out if council even has interest in in R1, RR, and LR, and then but not actual work or changes to this current ordinance until we've had a work session? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mayor and council, I mean, generally, yes, because I mean, at this point, from a staff perspective, I'm not sure what I would bring forward in terms of changes to Planning Commission and ultimately to council. Because I think there's a lot of different things that we may want to discuss for single family zoning districts that relate to housing and kind of the changes we're making. And so what we would normally do, just kind of like we did with this process, is through work session, have that discussion to try to gain some direction from council, see where you all stand on certain topics. That way, then my staff can actually write the ordinance. 2 weeks, definitely not enough. I mean, we're talking, this is probably a few month process to really make sure, you know, depending upon what comes out of the work session, the direction we get. If it's simple changes like maybe just smaller lots and narrower lots in the single family zone, those are pretty easy changes to make, and could come pretty fast. If we start talking about things like accessory dwelling units, certain permissions within the single family zoning districts that would allow for multiple units or things like that, that's probably going to take more work in terms of drafting that regulation because it doesn't exist anywhere in our code. It would be a complete new addition to our code. That would be something that we would have to, you know, really figure out where that goes and how that affects maybe other sections of our code and how we would apply that so that it would meet your objectives, whatever those objectives are that maybe come out of our work session.
Thank you.
Pierce?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
All right. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, Mr. Tini, and Mayor, I apologize if this is out of order, please tell me so, but I have concerns about passing the first ordinance that we just passed on second reading before we include R1. My interest in this particular amendment being brought forward, and I apologize that I misread it in the same way the Vice Mayor did, that this would be an amendment to the previous passed ordinance on second reading, is that without this, we are certainly continuing to pick on the lower socioeconomic community, places in the community. So is it possible to postpone the third reading of the ordinance we just passed until this work is ready to bring forward, and then bring them forward all together?
Councilmember Somerville, as of course you know, the second reading on the prior motion passed. So your question about that, I think, is moot. But your question about the third reading is relevant. But it might not be relevant until the third reading item appears on the calendar. I don't know what else to say about that at this time. Councilmember Harrington? I'm sorry, Councilmember Somerville, do you have a follow-up?
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. Yes, I do. I think it's important to talk about the timeline for which we're bringing a separate section, but that is related to the prior ordinance. So I guess I am still confused as to why we cannot construct a new table in relation to ADUs and lot lines for R1, similar to what we're doing with R2 and R3, and fold it into the past ordinance, the previous one that we just passed on second reading. I understand that Mr. Tini's preference is to bring it forward as a separate item. However, I guess I'm struggling with how this has been done tonight procedurally, and how to move that forward. This is not, I think, what the intent was of that conversation. So I guess I want to know if we can put a hold on the other stuff while we finish this. Does Mr. Tini feel like he can prioritize this work to have at least the basics that mirror the R2, R3 pieces back to us in a couple of weeks to potentially, instead of doing this, amend it into the one that we just passed on second reading.
Thank you for those clarifying comments. Councilmember Harrington, if you will, I'd like to go to the city manager if you're okay. I see that you're mid-apple there still, so we'll go to the city manager, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I would just echo, I think, what Mr. Taney has said, but maybe just with a little more assertiveness. Certainly, it is the intention of staff to deliver to the council whatever it is you might be looking for in these other housing zones. But the need for this work has only recently become apparent to staff. It is a very complex task. We have not been previously directed to perform this task. And in fact, we were directed to bring all changes to municipal code in smaller, more digestible motions for your consideration. So while it has been discussed by myself, by the assistant city manager and the planning manager, that we clearly desire to accomplish what you want here, it isn't a simple task, and it is something that will take time and that we have no direction on at this point in time. And so I would just echo what Derek said. We're going to need a work session with you all to understand what your intentions are here. And then once we understand that, Derek and the planning staff are going to have to go back and do significant research and cross-referencing throughout the development code to make sure that we haven't, I guess the word I would want, we're not creating bottlenecks in terms of making these revisions in these other sections. I wish we could do it faster, but this is a complex task.
Thank you, City Manager and Council. This gets at my previous comment about the Council kind of struggling with maintaining coherence on some complicated topics here. I think Mr. Taney was going to weigh in a little bit on this last topic, so please go ahead.
Mayor, Council, just also briefly, the other issue with the looking at the R1, LR, and RR zoning districts is any changes related to that haven't been considered by Planning Commission yet or had any public hearings related to it. We have not done any proper notice related to those zone districts. So I think just trying to be as transparent as we can when it comes to whatever changes come forward and whatever guidance we get from council through maybe a work session, still bringing those through the normal process is what we would recommend and what we would need to do, which that starts with the Planning Commission and then moves forward through council. So I just want to make that point that nothing that we've done up to this point has indicated that we would even be looking at these other than the secondary motion that we had on tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Taney. And again, that motion brought forward to try to do as much dual tracking of these complicated topics as possible. I've got Councilmember Harrington waiting next, and then I have Councilmember Schuster following that. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I would just say my reason for not introducing this was because I didn't understand what we were aimed at. It wasn't anything against the process initially. I would say at this point, though, I am a bit confused by this process. In the several years I've been on council, we've never had, in my recollection, any sort of motion that follows this framework. These issues, in my experience, if we're looking for a work session on this topic, that comes at item 15 this evening when we have the ability to request a work session, which just requires 2 council members, which we have a first and a second for that. This idea that we would have a secondary motion that would somehow slow down the motion that we just passed 7-2 as a body, to me, I can't figure out that why that's the path we're following here. I think these 2 motions need to stand independently. We can have a motion on the previous item, 2036, and then we can have a motion as well to authorize city staff to investigate this, but to slow down a process that has had considerable public comment, considerable public hearing, and stakeholder meetings and things like that, as well as multiple readings before the council, to slow that down to throw something at it 2 weeks from now on 3rd reading, or we just can't talk about it a third time, to me doesn't feel like good decision-making by this body. So, you know, I think if that, I'm a little confused about what we're doing here. I generally support the idea of us investigating these other zones, but if the intention is to slow down the thing we just passed, then I would be a no vote on this. And somebody can request a work session, but frankly, I will request a work session. I guess I just would like a little clarity from you, Mr. Mayor, or the staff on what a yes vote means in this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Before I go to you, Councilmember Schuster, City Clerk, could you please read just the text of the motion?
The text of the motion, Mayor, is to approve a recommendation by council to direct staff to begin housing-related amendments for R1, LR, and RR zoning districts.
Thank you, City Clerk. So that is the motion. And it doesn't include anything other than what you just heard, council members. And I think that's probably worth covering at this point in the meeting. I know we're going to have some more discussion, but I'd like to go to Councilmember Schuster, who's been waiting patiently, much as Councilmember Harrington was. Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. It is confusing the way we have done this, but council needs to remember something. We are the governing body. It's terrible what we can do, but we could take this third reading coming up on the first motion. We could delay it for 6 months until we have the other half straightened out. I think these should have been brought up on item 15, that we would like to have a work session on this, completely unrelated to the piece we just did. So it's very confusing what they did. It's very confusing in the order of what they did, and I can imagine what it's doing to the general public. But remember, whatever we decide to do, now we can't go back to the previous one and change our vote and do anything like that. But in 2 weeks, if we don't like the way this is going, we can delay that approval on third reading for as long as we deem, because we are the governing body. We are the decision makers. So I'm not proud of the way this one went. I will probably support it, but I'll probably talk to some people in the next 2 weeks on what we think about how we've done this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. I've got lots of hands coming up. I'm going to go to Councilmember O'Doherty, and then I'm going to go to Councilmember Gabriel.
I think what's not clear to me is related amendments. Is it amendment to the current zoning, or is it amendments to this ordinance? So I think that
point of order, the motion is not an amendment, Councilmember O'Doherty. It's actually a second standalone motion falling under the same agenda listing, but perhaps I'm not.
But it says to begin housing-related amendments. So that's what I'm not clear. Amending this ordinance or amending our zoning, that's what I'm not clear about.
Thank you. I won't have the city clerk repeat the motion, but it's tied to those zones mentioned specifically. And I do see more hands popping up. Can we give council? Can we give Mr. Tini a chance to weigh in on this? Go ahead, Mr. Tini.
Just clarity to the question there. The housing related amendments for the R1, LR, and RR zoning districts, because none of those are being considered in the current ordinance. It can't be related to the ordinance at hand. It would be separate, completely separate. So that's all.
Thank you. And just to give other opportunities for questions, let's keep it going. Councilmember Gabriel, and then I'll go to you, Councilmember Schmeckel.
Oh, thanks, Mayor, and I concur with Councilor Harrington on this. It seems to me that we're a little in front of this. We need a work session first to find out whether or not council is even interested in bringing this up for discussion. If if we have something to forward on to planning, then I think council needs to discuss it. But it seems to me that we're not even at that point. And so a work session would instruct, after discussion among members, what we should direct planning to actually be looking for the city council to consider. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will say that when I made the motion, my understanding was that at the time that it would be tied to the current ordinance under discussion and not a separate item. For the sake of clarity, my inclination is to vote no on this and then join another council member in requesting this during item 15 of tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember Schmeckel. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More of a point of information. Can you instruct me when the appropriate time would be to ask for a reconsideration of the previously passed motion? Can I do that after we take a vote on this motion?
That's a procedural inquiry, and I think it's at the next time the item comes forward, but I'm not sure, and I'm going to give the city clerk just a moment to look that up, and we'll see if there's any other discussion or comment about this current motion on the floor.
Thank you.
Council members, if you will, I'd like to make a comment about this. I'm going to go ahead and take total responsibility for your confusion this evening, and I do apologize for that. Again, I'd like to reiterate that this was an effort to try to address concerns that council members had brought up in the process, and to see if we could prioritize those concerns while at the same time moving forward with the changes made in the previous motion that passed, and prioritize the next set of revisions and changes to address some of those concerns that perhaps the previous item generated. I think that has failed, and I regret the confusion. But that was the genesis of asking staff to put together the motion to coincide. City Clerk?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to read from our rules of procedure, so I apologize if this is straight from that, but a reconsideration. No motion to reconsider a vote shall be in order except by a councilor who voted on the prevailing side. A council member who voted in the majority may move to reconsider an item that council has voted on during the same or next business meeting. It does need a second, and it does also require majority vote.
Thank you, City Clerk. There is a current motion on the floor that would need to be dispatched before a reconsideration motion on the item beforehand. So, to the motion on the floor, further discussion or comments from the council? I won't add to the mea culpa from before, council members, but I will just say I do apologize for the confusion. Councilmember Cumby.
We can't hear you, Councilor Cumby.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Cumby. Yep, that's all right. That's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It just seems to me that the motion on the floor is out of order. It does not seem to directly relate to the ordinance that was just passed, and that it was not part of our agenda, and it's been kind of injected into the meeting, and that it might be more appropriately handled as suggestions for a work session. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. As they say, council members, the road to you-know-where is paved with good intentions. Let's go to council members one more time, and let's see if there's a public comment on the item. And then we'll go back to council members for whatever action they see fit. Public comment on the motion for prioritizing Community Development Office on zoning changes and amendments. Probably a great deal of confusion. Would like to recognize Wendy Chapman. Wendy Chapman, you have the floor. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Chapman. I will admit I am confused, but I remember Councilperson Pierce saying at the beginning that she didn't want to vote for one before the other, and it makes sense to me. I'm kind of lost, but why couldn't one, like the third reading of one be postponed until more is known about the other one? Because they do seem to be related, even though they're separate ordinances or whatever you call them. So I would just say, I agree it's confusing, but I also agree that they are related, and maybe one thing should be known before we finalize the other thing. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Brett Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I think this is a case of ready, fire, aim. I really think we need to take a step back here, and council should consider generally what sorts of policies it wants to adopt and what its goals are before it moves ahead. And even before it goes ahead and passes a motion like this, I think there need to be some work sessions. There's just some general discussions of where you want to go with all of these ordinances that are coming through one at a time. So I would definitely recommend that you postpone action on the third reading on the previous item, and that you have some work sessions, and also that you talk to the public, because I don't think there's been sufficient public input. That Thrive Laramie program, which happened again, was mostly attended by special interest groups. I think we really need to hear from the residents of these communities before we proceed. Thank you.
Other comment on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Council members, I would like to address something for this discussion. Original ordinance number 2036, amending sections 15.10, 15.12, and 15.14, as recommended by the Planning Commission, is an item that went through a public process already and went through a first reading with the council and has garnered considerable public comment. This subsidiary motion was added to try and prioritize concerns brought up by council members and set planning with direction to address this as the next set of amendments bring forward on this issue. And again, clearly it has not worked to that effect. It does not actually create any particular code adjustments. It was simply to set out a policy priority from the council on the heels of original ordinance 2036. But again, it hasn't followed a process that people feel comfortable with. But I don't know if we would be able to accurately characterize that as reflecting on not having an adequate process for the other item that just passed, put in here to try to address concerns while at the same time moving forward. Is there any more discussion on this motion? Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, I'll be a no vote on this, not because I don't want to do it, because I feel that this has been inappropriately put forward in the process, and I would request fellow council members to vote no as well. And I will put forward a motion for reconsideration.
That motion is not made yet until this motion is dispensed with. Motion maker, shall we go to a vote, or do we have anything we'd like to add to this? I do believe the option to withdraw the motion is available.
If that's the case, I'll city clerk.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that, Councilmember Schmeckel, but I sense that that might be an option you'd like to be aware of.
So if that is the case and it's allowable, I would consider withdrawing the motion.
I thought you might, and I wanted to make sure that we had that option available for you, but we'll check and make sure parliamentarily that's in order.
Mayor, I think once it's been stated by the mayor and considered by the council, we do need to go to a vote on that. I can verify that though if you want.
No, we'll take your word for it. If no such option is available, council, let's have a roll call vote. Hey, Clerk, are you ready?
I'm ready. Cumbie.
No.
Gabriel.
No.
Harrington.
No.
O'Doherty.
No.
Schmeckel.
No.
Schuster.
No.
Somerville.
No.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 2 yeses and 7 noes, Your Honor.
That motion carries. And that motion has failed, is what I meant to say. Motion fails. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I would move to reconsider item 11 on our agenda, original ordinance 2036, amending various sections of Title 15.10, 15.12, and 15.14 of Laramie Municipal Code regarding R2, R2M, R3 zoning districts, dimensional standards, having voted on the prevailing side.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Council members, I'd urge you to keep your comments and questions on this relatively tight. Just a friendly request, and ask you if you'd be ready to receive public comment on this motion, or would you have questions or comments first? My preference would be to go to public comment and then back to council. Councilmember Schuster, go ahead.
I'm just going to make a quick comment. I am not going to change my vote. I will vote in favor of this. We passed it with good intentions. The Second Amendment we didn't like, but the original amendment I still feel in favor of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Council members, other comments for public comment on the item? Again, with a friendly request, keep it relatively concise because I think we've heard what folks have to say, both from the council and the attendees. Seeing none, council, back to you for a last opportunity to speak to the reconsideration. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Point of procedure. Is it appropriate to offer a postponement motion at this time on a reconsideration?
We do need to, my understanding, Councilor and Mayor, that we do need to vote to reconsider the previous vote. And then at that time, it brings the motion back to the floor and you could postpone or amend or however council decides to proceed from there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be a no vote on this reconsideration. My vote will not change. This ordinance has been through a lengthy public process and has been extensively really just, I guess it's been vetted by the public, by the Planning Commission, by the staff. So to hold it up because we want to do something wildly different, and I think there's no way to say this other than any sort of change in R1, LR, and RR are significantly different changes than what we're talking about in this ordinance. So to hold it up because we want to do something else, I think is really just impractical. And I don't know that that's in the best interest of our constituents and those living in the city of Laramie. So I would encourage a no vote on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Vice Mayor Pierce. And then I'll go back to you, Councilmember Schuster. But first, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just correct me if I'm wrong here. The vote that's coming up now is just to allow. It has nothing to do with the topic of this particular. This basically this vote is just basically to allow one or more council members to change their vote. That's all this is. This is just allowing a council member to basically say, I said yes, and now I want to say no, or I said no, and now I want to say yes. Am I understanding that correctly?
Vice Mayor Pierce, I believe that is correct. If this motion were to pass, we would then go back to consideration of the motion, which I would hope then would immediately proceed to a vote after taking comment from both the council and members of the public to allow for those votes to be changed or stay the same. I believe that is correct. City Clerk?
Thank you.
You have a different interest. You bet. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Good question. City Clerk, do you have any comment on that in terms of procedure?
Mayor, I believe you stated that correctly. We would take a motion or a vote on reconsideration and then back on the main motion, take another vote.
Thank you very much. And Vice Mayor, I agree with you. This is a vote to allow folks to change votes. Councilmember Schuster, thanks for waiting.
Just exactly what was said. I just wanted people to know on council, if you vote no, it stays just the way it is and we move on. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Further comment on this? I do regret muddying the waters, hoping to try to keep things on track. Didn't work. Shall we go to a vote on the reconsideration motion? City Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Okay, on the vote to reconsider, Cumbie? Sorry, Cumbie?
Yes.
Gabriel?
No.
Harrington?
No.
O'Doherty?
No.
Schmickel?
No.
Schuster?
No.
Somerville?
Yes.
Pierce?
Yes.
Weaver?
Yes.
That's 4 yeses and 5 noes, Your Honor.
That motion fails. Council, that'll take us to the next item. Council, I note that it's 8:22. Does anybody need a 4-minute, 5-minute break? I'd like to go to the next item. Seems like everybody wants to keep going. All right. Item number 12, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve original ordinance number 2038 on second reading, vacating approximately a 0.78 acre alleyway right-of-way within McHugh Addition lots 1 through 11, Block 1, generally located west of McHugh Street, south of Lyon Street, and north of Baker Street, as recommended by the Planning Commission based on findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Second.
Help me with the second. Those seemed almost simultaneous. I'm sorry. It is important for the record. Who is the second?
I did hear O'Doherty and Cumbie at about the same time, Mayor.
As did I. Who is the second? Councilmember
O'Doherty, second.
Second from Councilmember Cumbie. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Mr. Keeney.
Mayor, Council, this is a vacation of an alleyway that's, as noted in the report, in the McHugh edition. As I mentioned during the presentation given during first reading, this is an unused alleyway that's essentially kind of divides the properties between a driveway and the hotels that are located on the north end and vacant property that's located on the south end. As noted in the staff report, this was brought forward by essentially the KOA group in an effort to help facilitate maybe a future expansion of their property and their RV and campground a little bit further to the east onto some vacant land, and this kind of alleyway divides that. And so with that, it's a fairly straightforward process in terms of the things that we've looked at on the city side of thing. There are a few conditions that are associated with it, largely just a small easement for a utility that crosses perpendicular through the alleyway. And that's part of this process and would need to be done. And aside from that, really fairly straightforward in terms of the request. And as we noted, there was a public hearing tonight. We had no comments on that public hearing. I will point out we did have one public comment on this item, just related to, it was one of the property owners of the hotels on the north end. I just had a question about what was going on, made sure they understood what they needed to about the process and didn't have any concerns about it. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Tini? Mr. Tini, is there a representative from the applicant?
Mayor, council, I'm looking on here. I don't see their name, but
yeah, I thought we'd perhaps check, but I'm not seeing anyone raising a hand either. But I thought we'd best check. Questions for Mr. Tini? Okay. See if there's public comment on the item. Seeing none, council, back to you. City Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
The motion carries. City Clerk. Takes us to item number 13. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve original ordinance number 2039, adding Laramie Municipal Code section 8.80 related to Laramie rental housing and to amend by substitution on second reading.
Second.
This motion and a second from Councilmember Harrington. Council, I see the city manager is prepared to provide background. City Manager Jordan, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I wanted to start off just kind of with a short recap of what this ordinance provides for. So if the clerk would share screen using slides from first reading, I want to just walk through a few of these just as a way of orienting us to what second reading includes that was also included in first reading, excuse me. So Nancy's going to start with slide 7, I think. Thank you, Nancy. Sorry to confuse you, having you start halfway through, but Council, my feeling was the first few slides was just background information. So I'm starting here just to remind you that this ordinance as drafted on first reading and as it stands in front of you this evening on second reading would create a new section of Municipal Code, Title 8, with respect to rental housing. There are essentially 4 elements of this ordinance as it's currently drafted. The first is an educational and compliance program that we would launch to help both tenants and landlords understand what are considered minimum habitability standards for rental properties within Laramie. That minimum habitability standards is in fact the second element of this new code. The third element would be minimal fees, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit at the end of the presentation, but I want to draw your attention to that because, as you know, undoubtedly you as well as staff have received a number of comments related to fees and how it might affect the overall cost of rental housing in Laramie. And then the final or fourth element of the rental housing code as currently drafted is that a tenant would need to work with their landlord first before they file a complaint, but there would be established a complaint process through the city of Laramie. Just drawing your attention to some of the details of the minimum habitability standards. The habitability would basically center around having basic equipment and appliances, the unit having some structural integrity, ventilation, mold, and pests are addressed as mold and pests being undesirable and ventilation being desirable in habitable rental. Heating and electrical being in a working condition, weatherproofing and security features, locking doors and windows, etc. And then basic elements of fire safety, having fire alarms, carbon monoxide detection, and adequate egress and ingress into the property. Next slide. So I would point out for you, we do have those elements carrying forward from first reading to second reading. Nancy, if you want to move through the click features. I did also want to share with you all, as I did on first reading, what I envision is the implementation schedule for this ordinance. And this is draft. I want to make that apparent for both council and public. But as each of the 3 major elements of this ordinance are set forth, there is an allowance for staff to implement this fully no later than January of 2023, but to take a phased approach to that implementation. So this is the current phasing that I envision if this ordinance is passed by City Council. The dwelling unit registration program would be the first phase that we would implement, that beginning in roughly April 1st and hopefully concluding at the end of June. We hope in that period of time to have all of the registrations completed so that we understand the number of rentals that exist within the community. Then the second phase would be the habitability standards education and what I call an implementation grace period. I think it's certainly not lost on council nor on staff that this will potentially have landlords identifying areas where their habitability standards are deficient. They may be wanting to make modifications, putting in, say, carbon monoxide detectors, those kinds of things. So in phase 2, between April 1st and December 31st of 2022, we expect to have a fairly robust public education campaign in place and be sending information back out to those landlords who've registered their rental with the city so that they understand fully what the habitability standards are, and then allowing that grace period for them to complete any work as they might need to complete. The last and final phase of implementation would begin January 1st of 2023. And this is when the complaint program would kick in because at that point, the landlords would presumably have had 12 months or so to become familiar with the ordinance, its requirements, and to have addressed any physical matters in their dwellings that they need to address. And then at that point, complaints and the enforcement program could begin after that 12-month period. I also wanted to touch on fee resolution as promised, on the fees that we will bring forward by resolution, as I had said earlier. I do envision, and we've had fairly significant and detailed conversations at a staff level about the fee for registering a dwelling. It's not the intention of the city to raise money from this. It is the intention of the city to understand where our dwelling units are, who our landlords are, and be able to communicate more effectively with them. So we are projecting that we'll bring back a resolution to you in a few weeks if you pass this, that we'll have a $15 to $20 a year registration. And I know some of the landlords as well as tenants have expressed concern through public comment that this would drive up the cost of rental housing in Laramie. That is not our intention, and I would certainly hope that a minor fee like this of $15 to $20 a year would just simply be considered just a normal cost of doing business and not be passed on dollar for dollar to our tenants. The next slide. So actually, we can skip past this slide. But Council, if I could take you instead now to the cover sheet, because those are elements that we covered on first reading and remain sound, but there are a couple changes on second reading, as you know, and we'd asked you to substitute a substitute ordinance for consideration. There are two changes in your second reading ordinance by substitution. They're found in section 880.030. The first series of changes is in section B, C, and H under plumbing, heating, and electrical. And what we've done here is just to add some language that clarifies. It does make no change to what you saw in first reading, but instead just clarifies that there is no new burden placed on landlords to engage licensed contractors. And unfortunately, the language we provided you at first reading was not nearly as clear as it obviously could have been, and rightly so, folks raised concerns. So we've created some modified language that makes it clear that we are not making any new requirement for licensed contractors to perform this work, but that we are in fact just mirroring the existing requirements already in the code. And then the second change that you find on second reading is also in section 880.030, only under section K. And this deals with egress and ingress. And I do have Chief Johnson, as well as our Division Chief for Fire Prevention and Life Safety, or our Fire Marshal here as well tonight, if you'd like to talk about the egress or ingress modification. But basically what we've done is realize that we needed to be more specific, and we needed to mirror the fire code requirement for egress ingress in bedrooms. And so you will see that language from fire code just restated in this ordinance. If you have questions, the fire staff are here to answer any questions about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, based on one of the public comments that we did here earlier tonight, which seemed very reasonable, is under section I, where it deals with appliances provided in the dwelling unit. I do believe it was the intention of staff and the city attorney, as we reviewed this draft from council, that under the appliances section, that it was to read that appliances that were furnished by the landlord would be maintained by the landlord in accordance with the terms of the lease. And as I heard that public comment and went back to review section I, it does seem that we have lost some language there. So if that is a concern to council, it may be worth a clarifying amendment either on second reading tonight or third reading to add at the end of section I that statement in accordance with the terms of the lease, if that's something that the council would desire. That's all I have for you, and I appreciate your time. We'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Questions for the city manager, Councilmember O'Doherty, and then I'll go to Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I would like to add that language to section I under appliances, under, let's see what the header is, 8.8. So I guess I'm I'm moving that we amend section 8.80.030, section I, to insert the words furnished. Let's see. Can I ask the city manager for that language again? Furnished by the landlord according to lease must be in good working order. So after the word landlord, insert according to the lease. Thank you.
City Clerk, can you state the motion for us?
Thank you, Mayor. The motion is to amend section 8.80.030I to insert the words according to the lease after landlord.
That's my intention. Thank you.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Motion and a second from Councilmember Harrington. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion, and I've got Councilmember Schmeckel, Harrington, Somerville, Schuster. Oh, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to propose a friendly amendment to make it read in accordance with the terms of the lease, which would be the exact words the city manager used, assuming those are probably the vetted through legal department terms that should be included.
I accept that as a friendly amendment. Thank you.
All right, and since it was made by the second, we'll assume that the second concurs. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to clarify, was that just after the second time the word landlord appears in that motion? Say the motion as read, we did that twice. By inserting that language after the word landlord appears in item I twice. I'm assuming we're wanting to put it at the very end. Perfect.
Question is directed to the motion maker.
I lost my spot. I'm trying to get back to it. Yes, that is my intention.
Perfect. Second concurs.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, Councilmember Schmeckel. Councilmember Somerville, and then I'll go to Councilmember Schuster. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you. So this question is for the city attorney. This is a topic that I've had considerable discussion over the last couple of weeks, and there's a few points that I think might be relevant to this particular motion, and that is, so first of all, does the state statute require that the required appliances that the landlords have to provide, that those are also maintained by the landlord? Or by inserting this language, could we be opening up a loophole that tenants have to maintain the appliances provided, all appliances, if the landlord puts that in their lease agreement? That's question number one.
Council, if I understand the first part of the question, no, the state statute doesn't talk about appliances.
Okay. So I guess that is concerning. The second question that I had was in relation to liability. So the examples that were given to me by landlords was, a tenant moves in, they bring their own washer and dryer, and then they move out and they leave them. And so rather than moving them out, the landlord just allows the next set of tenants to use them, but doesn't want to be responsible for them. In a scenario like that, where appliances like a washer and a dryer, and I guess maybe we'll just stick to the dryer because that's the one that always concerns me, where they were left by tenants and the landlord allows the next set of tenants, I can envision a situation where new tenants move in and on day 2 or 3, that dryer starts the apartment on fire. Is there a liability concern? Who would be responsible for that damage if a new tenant moved in and acquired appliances? Previous tenant.
Yeah, property left at the termination of the tenancy under state statute becomes the property of the landlord if they wish to keep it. So that would have to be dealt with the next tenant. Either the landlord's going to supply it to the next tenant under the lease, or they're not.
And so under the terms of the lease, if the new tenant signed that they would maintain a washer and dryer, even if they've only lived in the apartment for a day and that dryer catches fire, that liability, it becomes the tenant's.
Well, that's something that the landlord has to work out with the tenant. I mean, it's either something they've supplied or they haven't as part of the rental operation.
But we're talking about a situation where in a lease, a landlord could put language in that lease that says, we'll maintain, the fridge, the stove, the furnace, but we will not, but the tenant is responsible for maintaining the dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer. et cetera, where a landlord could pick and choose which appliances they're going to maintain, even if the landlord provided those appliances.
No, see, there's the distinction. Did the landlord provide them to the tenant, or is the landlord just giving them to the tenant to sell or dispose of, or whatever the tenant wants to do? So, yeah, that has to be worked out between landlord and tenant to see if it satisfies the definition of something they supplied to the tenant, or is it something they just said, have them if you want, otherwise we're taking them away.
Okay, I appreciate that. Mayor, I'll have some comments, but thank you for the questions.
Councilmember Schuster, and then I'll go to Councilmember O'Doherty on the amendment.
Everything I was going to talk about has already been discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Councilmember O'Doherty.
Yeah, I was hoping that the state code covered basic appliances for kitchens, but it doesn't. Like, you don't have to provide anything, from what I can tell, except for working plumbing, electrical outlets, and lighting. So I'd be up for modifying this with some better language before the next reading. Thank you.
Further discussion. Councilmember Somerville, did you have some comments that you wanted to make? And then I'll go to you, Councilmember Schuster, only because Councilmember Somerville had said that earlier that she had some. Go ahead, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my comments are, I'm interested in trying to strike the balance here, but I'm uncomfortable with the language given some of those questions. So I echo Councilor O'Doherty's sentiment. I'd like to work on this and bring it back for third reading.
Councilmember Schuster. Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. As some of the comments were made earlier, and I contacted the attorney and some other people at the city, that I felt this thing is kind of sided one side. When I first moved to Laramie, I bought a very nice house. I struggled to afford it, and I worked side jobs, and a lot of them was repairing drywall because I'm good at it. So I probably repaired drywall in about 1,000 apartments in damage. So I moved to amend ordinance number 2013 to state an amendment to this section 8.80.060 to state that all renters that do not follow the contracts they are signed, we have problems with that. So I move that all renters must be registered by the city at a $20 fee that is put into a special account for landlords that can file for renters that do damage that exceed their deposits can cover.
Point of order.
Point of order.
We have a motion on the table.
We have a motion on the table?
Yes, Councilmember Schuster, your motion is in order to the main vote, so we've got to get rid of the,
that's right. There's an amendment on there right now. Thank you.
All right, we all do it. We all do it. No criticism there. Thank you for the points of order. Thank you for your patience, Councilmember Schuster. On the motion to amend, any more discussion from the council? Public comment on the motion to amend. Only on the amendment. For appliances. Okay, I've got a hand up from Sarah Teeter. Sarah Teeter, you have the floor. Thank you for waiting.
Hi, counselors. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Sarah Teeter. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've lived and rented in Laramie for nearly 10 years, and I would like to speak emphatically in favor of the proposed rental regulations.
Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. We're only taking comment on the motion to amend dealing with appliances. Did you have a comment specific to that? I'm sorry.
No, I didn't.
Sorry, and I apologize that this is the format that we have to follow. So if you didn't have a comment on the motion to amend regarding appliances, I'm going to have to ask you to hold your comment. And I do apologize. And
Thank you.
And we regret the confusion. We're looking for comments on the motion to amend. We will take comments on the main motion with apologies to our attendees. Looking for comments on the amended motion, Mr. Brett Glass. Brett Glass, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a procedural thing. I didn't hear during your discussion a motion to amend by substitution, which you'd think would come first because this is an amendment to that amendment. So you may want to review what's happened so far and see if you may want to do that first. That being said, if you look at state law regarding appliances, there's two things in the state law. In section paragraph 1203, it's Wyoming Statutes 121-1203, it says that the owner must maintain other appliances and facilities other than the electrical system, plumbing, heating, and hot water, as specifically contracted in the rental agreement. Now that makes sense because it's not common in Laramie, but some people do rent without some appliances, like say a refrigerator. It's not common, but it does happen. And so a lot of this really is contingent on what you've agreed in the lease and the terms of the lease. So I don't think we really need to go farther than that to say that, well, the owner has to maintain the things that are mandatory under state law, and then leave the rest to the contract. Now, the renter's duties specified in paragraph 1204 in the same statute says that the renter has a duty to use all electrical, plumbing, sanitary, heating, and other facilities and appliances in a reasonable manner, and that's only fair. We should have that obligation in any ordinance that we have, although, again, I would recommend not approving the whole ordinance, but if we do, that certainly should be there too. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking for comments on the amendment. Mr. Stephen Pence. Mr. Pence, you have the floor. Thank you.
And just as an echo as what was just stated, we do have several units in town with a variety of different appliances which are and aren't provided. The younger generation, many don't cook and don't find it important to have said facilities. And so we're seeing more units kind of transition that direction. And so just a point of consideration, again, I don't feel like we should be mandated to supply certain appliances solely because council thinks that they're important if the tenant does not agree.
Thank you. Mr. Riemann. Mr. Riemann, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Again, Jeremiah Riemann, on behalf of my wife, Kristen, and I appreciate the consideration of this topic. Again, I think my sense of the proposed amendment is it perhaps doesn't address our particular issue. In our lease, we do have there a provision that we will provide a refrigerator, a stove, and several other, mostly critical elements. And we do have in our provision in there that we will maintain those at our expense. The washer and dryer, on the other hand, are elements that we have in our lease that we will provide them, but maintenance is the responsibility of the tenant. My concern in suggesting that the proposed amendment doesn't get to addressing that issue is that it comes after the language that suggests it shall be maintained by the landlord in accordance with the lease, the terms of lease as I understood it, which in other words, as I read that statement, suggests we are responsible for maintaining it and would be required to put that into our lease. So in any regard, I appreciate that this is a topic of interest and do hope we can get to the right place. I'm just not certain that the proposed amendment gets us there.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. Caitlin Hettinger. I hope I got the last name right. You have the floor. Thank you for waiting.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as a youth in the community, I promise we do cook. I cook every day. I do need a fridge and I need a stove. And I think that landlords acting like a fridge is not a basic necessity in a kitchen is part of the problem that we're seeing. So that would be my comment, because yeah, like we're 20, we might be in our 20s, but we do still eat. We're not like a completely different species. So yeah, landlords pretending that basic necessities aren't basic necessities is part of the issue that we're having. So that would be my comment. And I think that landlords should be required to provide basic appliances and maintain them. And I'd also say that landlords trying to maintain their own properties without the proper knowledge or experience has caused so many of the issues that we've seen in our houses. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Comments on the amendment? Like we might be tapped out on comments on the amendment.
Aaron has her hand up.
Council, back to you, Councilmember.
I'm going to vote against my amendment because I think it needs to be clarified, and I will work on that before the next reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty, and we have other amendments forthcoming. Is everyone ready for a vote on the amendment?
She could withdraw her amendment if she wishes to.
I think we established that we couldn't do that earlier in the meeting. City Clerk, just to check again.
That is what we said earlier. Once it's been stated and brought on the floor for discussion. No, that's okay.
Councilmember Schuster, I don't mean to single you out. I do actually try to keep some consistency if possible. All right, City Clerk, let's have a roll call vote on the amendment.
Cumby.
No.
Gabriel.
No.
Harrington.
No.
O'Doherty.
No.
Schmeckel.
No.
Schuster.
No.
Somerville.
No.
Pierce.
No.
Weaver.
No.
That's 0 yeses and 9 noes, Your Honor.
That motion fails. Council, back to you.
Mayor, point of order, please.
Yes.
This meeting ends at 9, and we've got 3 minutes.
That is correct. City Clerk.
Why at 9?
Mr. Mayor, in our rules of procedure, when an executive session is on the agenda, the above 9:30 changes to 9, and the 10 changes to 9:30. So in essence, what that does is allows us to continue this item to 9:30. But no additional items besides public comment can be introduced.
Thank you, City Clerk. Vice Mayor, further input on that question?
No, that's fine. I just thought we had to vote if we wanted to continue.
I appreciate your checking, Vice Mayor. City Clerk?
Mayor, I was just going to say a 2/3 vote would be required if you were going to extend the meeting to allow additional items past the 9 o'clock time.
Thank you. Councilmember Somerville?
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I would move to incorporate the described changes, including clarifying the language around contractors and respect to egress requirements, fire code requirements that were described by moving to substitute with the revised ordinance number 2039.
Second.
Thank you, Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. I believe the motion actually is as amended for this item. City Clerk, can you help us with that?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, in Councilor Pierce's main motion, it did include to amend by substitution on second reading.
Perfect. Thank you. My apologies, Mayor.
Oh, no problem at all, Councilmember Somerville. Did you have the floor? Did you have something else?
I did not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Council members. Councilmember Schuster, I believe you had been in the process of a motion earlier.
I want to wait and see if there's any other questions. If there's no other questions, then yes, I would like to move forward, but I will let you check for questions first.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Council, are you prepared for Councilmember Schuster's motion, or do you have other questions? Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. Like I stated, my first 10 years I did here to help make ends meet, that I did drywall repairs, and I probably did 1,000 drywall repairs in the city of Laramie to rental apartments. I won't say any certain group was worse than the other, because it seems like we're pushing that on some of our statements. But I move to amend original ordinance number 2039 on second reading to state the amendment to section 8.80.060 to state that all renters that do not follow the said contracts they have signed, that I move that all renters must be registered by the city at a $20 fee that is put into a special account, so that landlords that have a problem, that have property destroyed, or people that walk away without paying their rents anymore, can then file for an amount from that deposit so that they can cover their expenses.
All right. City Clerk.
Needs to be a second before anything happens.
Right. City Clerk. Oh, City Clerk, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to ask if I could have the motion repeated, and I apologize. I know it was lengthy, but just to make sure we get that in the record.
Okay.
Councilmember Schuster, thank you.
We'll try it again. It may not be perfect word for word, but it'll be the gist. I move to amend original ordinance number 2039 on second reading to state the amendment to section 8.80.060 to state that all renters that do not follow the contracts they have signed, I so move that all renters be registered by the city of Laramie at a $20 fee that is put into a special account that landlords can file for if a renter does damage or skips on their rent that exceeds their damage deposit. And I wanted to make one other statement. Okay. Somebody
yes,
said
Councilman Schuster,
yeah. Okay.
Just going to give the City Clerk a minute to get your motion transcribed.
Okay. The other one has nothing to do with the motion. A person earlier in the comments said that they can have their grades withheld if they didn't pay their parking tickets. I want to make sure that was stated. That's not the Laramie Police Department. They have no connections with the university. That only happens when they do something that the UW police do something about. Because that was made in public comment earlier.
Let's, just as we ask of members of the public, I'd ask the council to try to keep the comments to the motions as they're taken in order.
Okay. Doesn't look like I'm going to get a second anyway.
City Clerk, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you.
Is there a second to the motion from Councilmember Schuster? It's at that point during the making of the motion. Councilmember Schuster, it does not appear there's a sufficient second for the motion.
Okay.
Comments and discussion on the main motion.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question though. Yes. To bring for the city to bring something on, it has to be recommended by at least 2 counselors. Can I ask what counselors? Because a lot of people said, "How could you do this?" And the thing was, I had nothing to do with this. I would like to know, because 2 counselors had to say, I would like to see this brought forth. I'm kind of curious on who the two counselors were.
Mr. Mayor, this is not in order.
It's not a valid question.
City clerk.
Mayor, I
Counsel?
can address that.
Go ahead, city clerk.
The sponsoring council members that we have on file are Councilor Somerville, Pierce, and Weaver.
Thank you.
Correct. I had hands up before, but I don't know if they were still wanting to make comment before I go to the vice mayor. Vice Mayor, I don't see those hands coming back, so I'd like to recognize the vice mayor.
Yeah, thank you. This was also part of our approved list of goals. So just to be clear, this has been discussed for a long time. This was, like I said, as part of our goals, and it shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody.
Yes, and before I move on to the next council, I'm going to tack on to that it was part of council goals in 2020 and 2021. That's on the record. Councilmember Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unless anybody would like to continue that conversation, I have another amendment I would like to propose for council consideration.
You have the floor.
Thank you. I move that section 8.80.060, letter B, be amended to read, owner must identify an owner's agent who resides in Wyoming, not more than 60 miles from Laramie, Wyoming, for every dwelling unit, and provide contact information for this responsible party. And if this is adopted, I don't know if this needs to be included in the amendment, Mr. Mayor, but we would also need to modify the definition of owner's agent to represent that change to the sort of geographic tag associated with it.
Second.
There's a motion and a second from Councilmember Somerville. Sounds as if the motion is comprehensive. City Manager, does it need further clarification as to where that change would go?
Mayor, I'd certainly defer to the city attorney, but I believe that the clarification would be best included in the definition of owner's agent, and that it would apply throughout.
Thank you, City Manager. City Attorney, can you help us with this question?
Still looking.
Certainly.
These are things that are hard to do on the fly, I should say. Hang on.
You're fine, City Attorney.
Well, I think I'll also defer to the city manager, but it does look like it would go in the definition of owner's agent.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Doherty and then Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember O'Doherty first, then Somerville, then Cumbie. Those are the hands that I've got. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I'd like to suggest that we have this amendment worked up for the next reading.
Mr. Mayor, if I think we'd have to vote on it still just the same. I would be happy to spend more time with it and work with the city manager or city attorney before the next reading if it passes this evening.
Deferring to Councilmember Harrington since he made the motion, but I'm going to go to Councilmember Somerville, then Cumbie. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to add as the second to the motion, I believe if the language is duplicated both in the definition and the section that was referenced, that covers both changes and would make the language valid. But if the city attorney would like additional time to review it, I I'm okay with bringing it back on the third reading.
Mayor, yeah, I see Councilor Somerville's point. So I think to do something like this, we do need a little bit more time to talk about it than right this moment to make sure we have definitions squared away.
All right. And as we've touched on a couple of times tonight, there is a procedure we've got to follow. Councilmember Cumbie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to say that in order to critically look at something, I really need to read it. And so I would appreciate being able to read it because I don't get it as much from hearing.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumbie. As the city attorney says, amendments on the fly are difficult. City Clerk, I saw you were you were looking for recognition. Please.
Mayor, I was just going to say, I haven't heard you state the question or the motion. So if you haven't brought it to the floor, they could withdraw the motion for now, if that's the desire.
Councilmember Harrington?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I withdraw the motion.
Second concurs.
Going to defer to the city clerk for parliamentary procedure, and the motion will be withdrawn. Further discussion on the main motion. Time is 9:09, just for reference. Discussion on the main motion. We go to public comment on the main motion. I recognize Sarah Teeter. Sarah Teeter, apologies for procedural delays in allowing you to make your comment earlier. You have the floor.
No problem. Thank you. Glad to know I'm commenting on the main motion this time. So just to repeat, my name is Sarah Teeter. I've lived and rented in Laramie for nearly 10 years, and I would like to support the proposed rental regulations. I've read about the proposed regulations, and I believe they're a necessary step to ensure everyone in Laramie has access to safe housing, which is a basic need. I've had several different experiences renting in Laramie, good and bad. And in the bad situations, I really can't express the dread and anxiety that comes from living in a place where you do not feel safe. And feel as though you have no recourse. The proposed regulations won't solve all the issues renting in Laramie, but it's an important step our community needs and deserves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time and patience with the council and making your comments. It's important for us to follow the regular procedures, although sometimes it can be frustrating for all of us. Further comment on the main motion. I'd like to recognize Brett Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First I wanted to comment on the amendment by substitution, although I'm not sure if that was something that should have been voted on, but that's your call as chair. But anyway, that amendment goes partway toward resolving the issue about repairs. However, I think the council should go a little bit farther with that. There's no reason why a property owner shouldn't be able to pull a permit for a job that requires one and perform the work herself. For example, suppose an electric water heater in one of my family's rental units were to go out between Christmas and January 2nd, I would not be able to get a licensed plumber in to come and fix it. But I'm quite capable of driving over the hill to Lowe's, picking up a new one, connecting 2 pipes and 3 wires, and getting the new one going. It's not rocket science. It's honestly hard to do wrong. And the water heater comes with a relief valve to ensure that it can't overheat or overpressurize. So I would like to be able to pull a permit to work on my own rental property with my own hands with the provision that it is inspected by the city. I think I'll actually do a better job than most of the contractors in town. And again, I'm more than willing to have the city inspect the work. I wouldn't mind having the extra pair of eyes to make sure everything's perfect. But I'd like to get the job quickly for the sake of my tenants, or this ordinance will be counterproductive and keep me from fixing things when I can do that for my tenants quickly. So I'd like you to consider that. The other section affected by the amendment by substitution has to do with egress windows. Oddly, the requirement that you've adopted for the height of the window opening is greater than the required width, which is backwards, because most human bodies are wider than they are thick. This is probably a mistake, so please look at correcting it. Also, please modify the minimum height from the ground to be 60 inches rather than 44, and the reason for this is that digging down deeper in many tree area homes would cause the window opening to go below the water table, causing the basement to flood. We want to encourage people to put in these windows, so let's not make it impossible for them to meet the requirement. Now, in general, as we've seen from tonight's discussion, there are many questions as to whether this ordinance, even though it seems to be driven by sincere concerns on the part of at least some council members, would do the right things. I really am concerned that it will be counterproductive. We need policies that offer carrots as well as sticks, and this ordinance offers no carrots and all sticks. It seems intended to punish rental property owners and managers rather than helping them provide better housing, and to exclude units from the market instead of making affordable housing more available. And as I mentioned earlier, there are also severe legality concerns with this ordinance. Now, our own city manager's slide showed that 20 out of more than 8,000 units were rated by the county assessor as being in poor condition. It seems like overkill to impose all of these regulations to weed out less than 2% of all properties, when a bit of education of consumers is sufficient to do that. Our city has limited resources, and it really needs to stick to its knitting and not attempt to do things which are already done by the state law. It shouldn't overregulate, bloat the size of government, or impose unnecessary taxes or burden upon our city and its residents. So I really hope and pray that in the end this ordinance doesn't pass. But if it does, I urge citizens who have the same concerns to do something to ameliorate this. If it's necessary for people to run for council to change this, maybe they should. But I really am concerned about this trend toward overbearing bureaucracy and needless and costly regulation, which will do the opposite of what's intended. Thank you.
Further comments on the main motion? Stephen Pence. Mr. Pence, you have the floor. Thank you.
I'm sorry you guys have to hear my voice so much. Just a few thoughts. I didn't really hear any clarification on my questions as far as why the university is being exempt from these regulations, or what the proposed resolutions or egress possibilities would be for second and third story buildings. I'm not sure. I don't have the new revised document in front of me, and so if it's in there, I do apologize. I can read. I promise I can read. Just another thought that I've had, and again, this is probably too far out there to be considered, but I think that this would be wonderful if this was considered a voluntary program rather than compulsory. If landlords could opt in to become Laramie City certified, if it is something that is important for a tenant to seek out a Laramie City certified landlord, they could do so. And I think that it would be a good proof of concept for landlords if they see everyone that has their Laramie City certification have tenants coming out their ears and they can't fill their shady basement apartments, then maybe that would get them off the bubble to move some things. But I think that could be a win-win for everyone to make this a voluntary program, a certification that would be available for landlords to seek out, an accolade that they could have hanging on their window or in their advertisements, and then also provide you guys with an ability to say, hey, we're doing our best. We're providing ways for landlords to fall under this program where they can be certified and also have this mediator in place if there is an instance of violation of contract. I also feel like just having a mediator in place to help with contracts would be all that would really be needed. I feel like this is 4 layers to accomplish what 1 layer would do. If you had a mediator in place that someone could take their contract to, which it sounds like Linda Devine is already doing, but if you guys supplied an additional free resource, that may be all that's needed right now. I just don't know how big or widespread the problem is, and I know that I'm one side of the problem in many respects, But we really do our best. I mean, I'm governed by a state commission already, being a licensed realtor. And so now to be licensed and then governed by a state commission, I'm also now going to be subject to a city ordinance and another city layer where they already have a state commission that they can complain to and take these complaints to. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other comments on the main motion for council to hear? Seeing none, we'll go back to the council. Councilmember Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. It'll come as no surprise that I am not going to support this tonight. I have received overwhelming opposition to this, email, phone calls. A handful of people have supported it, but I feel as a counselor, it's important to represent those people that have contacted me. And, we heard from Josh tonight, Diana, Joe, Brett, Stephen, with all very concerning avenues when you look at this proposed ordinance. Residential rental property, Article 12, state statute. I would hope that council would take a look at that. It details exactly what we're talking about. Prohibited acts by renter. Renter's remedies, notice to owner of agent, judicial remedy, rights under termination of rental agreement, required notice of non-refundable, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but just, another layer of government seems to me unreasonable when it's right here in Article 12, residential rental property. Another thing that really is kind of upsetting to me is this timing, 4 days before Christmas. Possibility of the third reading right after the new year. Where is everybody? They're not thinking about this important ordinance for the city. So that also really concerns me. So with that, I know the time is getting late, but I felt it was important to speak up for the people that have contacted me that are opposed to this, because we have this layer. It's called the residential rental property, state statute, Article 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Councilmember Doherty.
I want to remind the councilors that we heard from a unanimous vote from the student body, from the so that is, they represent a lot of people. So we always hear from landlords because they have a loop, they're connected through rental agents and things. But the student body, we've heard from them. We hear from them time and time again. And I would say that's my ward, is the university student body, a lot of them that live east of 15th. So when I hear from students time and time again that that the state statute doesn't protect them, it doesn't require egress windows, it doesn't require smoke detectors, it doesn't require just basic health and safety. So I have great concern over those things, and somebody who's new to leasing shouldn't have to try to pull down the state ordinance and then take their landlord to court to just have the windows that seal. And I want to ask the staff, when there's an issue with snow removal and there doesn't appear to be anyone living at the residence, probably because they're on spring break, and we don't even know who the owners are except for going through the assessor site, and you can mail something, but that owner could be away when they receive that mail that says you have 4 inches of ice building up on the sidewalk. So we need a way to contact people to say there's ice on the sidewalk, please get it up before we have to do something about it. Likewise, if there's something terrible happens on the property, if somebody's injured and we need to, or worse, is there a way to contact those people? We have no way. So that's why I feel there's a need for this. There's overwhelming support from the students, and there are a lot of things that don't get. Plus, there was the expose in the Boomerang about one of our worst landlords. So if that doesn't indicate we need some regulation, that I don't know what it takes. Thank you.
Further comment, discussion from the council on this item. Seeing none, council, I do see that attendee, and I'll defer to the council on this. That wasn't. Pardon me, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to call the question.
Second.
So the motion has been made with a second. Roll call vote, please. Clerk. Wait, I should clarify. This is a vote to proceed to a vote on the main motion as amended by substitution. City Clerk.
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmickel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
All right. That motion carries. City Clerk, and we have a roll call vote on the motion as amended by substitution.
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
No.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmickel,
Yes.
Schuster,
No.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 7 yeses and 2 noes, Your Honor.
Motion carries. Thank you, City Clerk. Council, that takes us to item number 14, public comments on non-agenda related items, 926. Public comment on non-agenda items. Seeing none, close the public comment period. Well, let's see. Procedurally, do we need a motion now to adjourn to executive session since it's 9:26?
Yeah, we would need a motion to extend to introduce a new item.
Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we extend the meeting to introduce item 16.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Somerville. Any discussion? Let's go to the roll call vote.
Cumby, Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmickel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That motion carries. Item number 16. Do I have a council member to introduce item number 16?
I think it's my job.
Council Member Schuster.
I move we adjourn to executive session regarding litigation, Wyoming State Statute 16-4-405, small letter A, Roman numeral 3, and land negotiation, Wyoming State Statute 16-4-405, small letter A, Roman numeral 7.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned to executive session. We'll see you there in a few minutes.